Check, 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 check. Should be good. Give it another minute. Oh boy, it's late. It's around 10 p.m. Sunday night. Your boy Nicky Stees is here, and yeah, we gonna talk a little bit about some sports. That's right, your boy's talking about sports again, folks. I got an interesting question to propose. Because we've been seeing a lot of records changing or a lot of streaks being broken. It's been happening a lot in recent years. Now, some streaks, though, like, for example, Mike Tomlin with the Pittsburgh Steelers, most going 19 seasons without a losing record. Not the most significant streak of all time. Not the most iconic streak in sports history. If you look closer at it, you think about it. A lot of those were either 8-8, just missing the playoffs, or getting in the playoffs only to get crushed in the first round. So that really wasn't the greatest streak ever, if you really think about it. Especially in the later years, a lot of that had to do with just, okay, there was a 7th seed added and they were getting into the playoffs, or some cases with the expanded schedule to 17 weeks, a lot of some of those 9-win seasons late in Mike Tomlin's campaign, they were just Pittsburgh getting in the playoffs because of the extra week and extra seed. So, like, that was, 19 straight seasons without a losing record. I mean, it is impressive. A lot of teams struggle to go there, but if you really look closer at that streak, in the later years, what did the Steelers really have to ride home with except, oh, we didn't have a losing record. We didn't have a losing record. We didn't have a losing record. Particularly 2018 going till last season as one example. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, that streak really didn't do anything for the Steelers. They haven't been in championship contention since 2016, 2017, when they made it to the AFC Championship game against the Patriots and lost, or then, hey, what's up, Daniel Barry, what is up? Or you flash forward, the following year, they made it as the number 2 seed, were considered contenders, but got beaten the opening round by the Jacksonville Jaguars. So those later years where the Steelers were consistently finishing 8 or 9 wins, not having particularly late 9-win seasons without a losing record, it didn't pay off with the Steelers getting anywhere near a Super Bowl. The last time they got close was back in 2016, 2017 when they made it to the AFC Championship game. So in that perspective, the streak, it wasn't that prestigious. It's not the most impressive streak ever in sports. And then we've seen in like recent, especially in basketball, in this 3-point revolution era, we've seen a lot of scoring records changing hands. We've seen the 3-point record broken multiple times. We've seen certain players pass the mark, like Kevin Durant, now moved in the top 5 all time for most points by a player. We've seen, LeBron James reach the top 5 or break so many records. But now, on one hand, the fact that you play, I'll say this, starting with all, like for the LeBron ones, I'll just say this. All the records does speak to longevity. And the fact that you played that long is impressive and had the opportunity to reach the top 5 in, all-time points, minutes played, assists, etc. That is impressive. But that doesn't give the full context in terms of the greatest player of all time discussion. Passing records because of longevity doesn't tell the full picture of who had a better quality run during their time. Or like you see with the 3-point record. Yes, it's some of these guys like, hey, Steph Curry, hey, you could argue he's legit the greatest 3-point shooter ever. But for some of these other guys like Kevin Durant reaching the top 5 all-time scoring, you gotta remember the context it's in too. Today's era of basketball where you just get a lot of 3-pointers, a lot of players don't really play that great defense. It's a lot easier to score points consistently too. And you have these games nowadays, you get a lot more games with both teams going into the 120s or higher, whereas back when Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, John Stockton, even before that, you go to, the eras with guys like Pete Maravich, Jerry West, Bill Russell, so on and so forth. You didn't really get as many times where teams scored that high. So, yeah, it's only fitting that in this era, guys like Kevin Durant, LeBron James, and so many others reach a top 10 or top 5 all time scoring. James Harden reached the top 10 all time for most points. But that's also due to longevity and the fact that, like I said, players don't really play defense nowadays. And that's not an insult to today's players necessarily, but a lot of them don't play defense as well. There's no hand checking. It lacks the physicality that players from previous eras, such as a Larry Bird, and, Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, James Worthies, Michael Jordan, Reggie Miller, I could go on and on, John Stockton, and just, those guys played a much more physical game, so it wasn't always as easy to get those buckets, too. And back then, people didn't go to the free throw line as much because you didn't call fouls as frequently when guys were getting hit, so that's another factor, too. So you got to remember, so yeah, it's just, so all these records now with all these guys reaching top 10 for most points, we know why it's happening. It's in part happening because today's era, it's that era where you don't get a lot of defense. Now, I'm not trashing today's product at all, the players involved. I'm just saying the reason, like some of these records being broken, it's really a byproduct of today's era where sports has changed as a whole, where it's more offensive friendly now. It's not just that, it's football as well. See, baseball, they moved. There's a lot more games now with higher scores. NFL, the same. Quarterbacks often throw for more touchdown passes per season in this era. So, it's really a byproduct of today's game. They want to keep, let's be honest, a lot of these sports executives want high-scoring games because they feel like that's going to draw more people to the stadiums or the TVs or the highlight reels on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, whichever. So that's part of it too. That's just really, so it's like, yeah, like when you look at like top 10 most passing yards at all time, I'm actually going to do that right now, for example. 10, so I'm like top 10 most passing yards all time in NFL. And I'm going to prove my point because the majority of these players are going to be players from recent years that break these records. And let's see, top 10 all-time NFL passing yards leaders. Let's take a look. Number 1, Tom Brady. 2, Drew Brees. 3, Peyton Manning. 4, Brett Favre. 5, Ben Roethlisberger. 6, Phillip Rivers. 7, Matt Ryan. 8, Dan Marino. 9, Aaron Rodgers. 10, Matthew Stafford. So, look, most of those quarterbacks came from played in the 21st century, either a portion or a majority of their career in the 21st century, except for Dan Marino. So, you think about it, now you see why Dan Marino was considered truly one of the best of all time, because he reached, at one point, he would have been closer to the top of that. He probably did at one point have that record for most passing yards before Favre passed him. So, but then you see in the years since, so many quarterbacks have passed that since. So that's also a product of today's era, too, where football isn't as physical. These guys had longer careers, such as Brady, Brees, Roethlisberger, Phillip Rivers, Matt Ryan, Aaron Rodgers. These guys, you're not getting hit as much as Dan Marino, Jim Kelly, Troy Aikman, Steve Young, Ken Stabler. They don't get hit as often as those guys. Joe Namath, Johnny Unitas. Football's not as physical, so these guys, today's era, majority of the guys on that list had longer careers as a quarterback than the average starting career. And don't get me wrong, yes, you did have your longevity, too. You had your guys like your Joe Montanos, your Dan Marinos of the world. Who else? John Elways. They had long careers, too. Jim Kelly, not as long as those guys, but he had a long career to some extent. But then you also had guys who had shorter careers, successful but shorter careers, guys like Steve Young, Troy Aikman. But that also plays a factor when you look at these all-time records too. Of course, like for most passing yards, most touchdowns in a season, they're going to come in recent years where football's more offensive friendly. Now, moving us to use another example. Top 10 most TD passes in an NFL season. So we're going to look at that next and see how many of them come closer to today's era. All right. You got Peyton Manning, 55, 2013, 2018, Patrick Mahomes, 50, Tom Brady tied with Mahomes at 50 in 2007. Then Peyton Manning had 49, 2004, 48, Rodgers and Marino tied. Rodgers 2020, Marino 1984, Drew Brees 46, 2011, 45 to Rodgers 2011, Marino 44, 86, Brady 2021, 43. I mean, so again, most of these came in today's era where it's much more passing friendly. So in this case, records being broken, especially on offensive side, are a byproduct of today's era, where it's more offensive friendly. Now let's switch gears. Top 10 most INTs in an NFL season. Let's see where this trends in an NFL season by a cornerback. All right, there we go. I just put in a more specific search. Okay, this gave me top career interceptions. You got in the top 10, you got for career interceptions is what the search I got. So we'll go with that. So you got Rod Woodson, 71, Dick Night Train Lane, 68, Charles Woodson, 65, Emlyn Tunnel, 79, Darren Sharper, 63, who's currently rotting in prison, tied with Ronnie Lott, 63, Dave Brown, 62, Paul Krause, 81, all-time leader, mostly safety. Okay, but all-time leader for most interceptions. Then you got Everson Walls, 57, Mel Blount, 57. So most of these guys that lead for most interceptions in their career were guys that played in previous eras. So certain records that are being broken, being set year to year, like most three-pointers, most assists, that's changing from a year-to-year bait, or most touchdown passes, most yards, most completions. That's changing mostly from more recently because of the changes in the rules. So some of those stats can be a bit deceptive. They tell the story of, oh my gosh, today's quarterbacks are so great on paper, but there's some things you got to factor in. Like the changes of the rules, more pass interference and roughing the passers penalties in football. Now, if you say take guys from the 80s, like Dan Marino, put him in today's era with the rules, then chances are he could destroy all the records. Or you take a guy like, say, a Joe Montana, put him in today's era, imagine how many top 10 records he would have cracked. Imagine how many top 10 records Marino would have cracked in today's era. Or a guy like a John Elway in today's era, how many top 10 records would he have gotten? So, you gotta look at it that way. Some of these historically great quarterbacks playing in today's era with the rules leaned in their favor, oh, you best believe they'd have more top 10 all-time records. If they swapped eras, the roles would be reversed. Like guys from today's era, say, would have probably had more like Joe Montana, like the top guys like the Mahomeses, Lamar Jacksons, the Josh Allens would have had more along the lines of the Joe Montana, Jim Kelly type stat lines. Just saying as an example. Whereas the guys I just named from that era, they would have more top 10 records in longer careers too. So there is that factor as well. Like, you rarely got cases where guys like Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, having 20-plus year careers, not really, it wouldn't really work Like, so that's a factor when it comes to records too. It's not necessarily, I wouldn't say it's pointless, but it can be deceptive sometimes. It can, especially as the years go along. I feel like once the older generation's gone, and then you get more younger fans that see, as like years from now, they'll see top 10 records. They're going to look at, oh, well, this person had 200, right? Like, they're going to look at records and probably go based off that for all-time greats. And as years go along, it's possible, guys, like, some of these guys like Terry Bradshaw's of the world, Roger Staubach's of the world, or Randall Cunningham's, Ken Stabler's, and so many other guys from previous eras, they might be, for as far as the record books goes, they might be forgotten about as far as the record books go years from now. Because, like, some of those all-time passing yards leader, TD leaders, eventually guys like Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen are going to have a crack at it, eventually. Trust me, they're going to eventually come a time where those guys have a crack at those top 10 records. Those passing yards, touchdowns, most consecutive start. Well, consecutive starts, not so much, maybe not as much, but the other ones, yeah, most franchise touchdown passes, yeah, eventually, over time, the record book might forget about some of these greats that paved the way. Once more quarterbacks from today's era end up pushing themselves into the record books. So, I mean, even Matthew Stafford started doing that, especially with the Rams, so it's going to be interesting to see, like 10, 20 years from now, what the all-time record books look like. Where do some of those greats that have fallen out of the statistical record books, where do they stand? Now, will they be completely forgotten about? No, of course not. There are people that are going to pass their legacy on. All those guys, like the Terry Bradshaws, Dan Marinos of the world, all those guys, they're eventually going to, those names will still remember, but even some guys that were once considered greats like Bob Greasy from the Miami Dolphins in the 70s, his name gets kind of slept on when you talk about all-time QBs, because now when you get guys like Brady, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers enter the conversation, Bob Greasy's name goes a little bit further down. Now, was he a true all-time great? Maybe not that, but Bob Greasy, I'll say, was one of the best quarterbacks of the 70s. He was certainly one of the best of his era, but eventually over time, when as eras pass and more you get QBs from those eras, you start comparing, like, of course, like you compare Bob Greasy in the 70s to Peyton Manning and Tom Brady in their era, respectively. Brady and Manning look better. So it'll be interesting to see over time who maybe takes the dip that was once considered one of those all-time greats. Like, will a guy like a Jim Kelly maybe be a guy like 10, 15 years from now that people will remember him, but maybe 10, 15 years from now, he's not as talked about? I mean, even a guy like Ken Stabler, who was once considered one of the better quarterbacks in history, now, I mean, his name gets brought up, but people don't talk about him like one of the greats like they would have back, say, in the 90s, now that you've seen all these other quarterbacks come through. So, I mean, so statistical records, it can be a bit deceptive because it might not it doesn't always tell the full picture, but sometimes it can be an indication. To me, when it comes to records and when it comes to stats, if you want to really know how good someone is, you got to compare them to the best in their era. Like, if you want to talk about how good someone like a Steve Young is, well, you got to compare him to the guys like the Troy Aikmans, Dan Marinos of the world. And then, or who else? Who's the other one? It just escaped my mind. John Elway's and those guys. But like, okay, those were some of the best in his era. Brett Favre is another. Those guys from the 90s were some of the best in the 90s. Compare them there. Steve Young measured up. He's an example of quality over quantity. He didn't have a long run as a starter, but when he did, he made the most of it. And if the Cowboys would have been in a different conference, Steve Young would have started in more Super Bowls. So he wouldn't have had just one Super Bowl start. He would have had more. So it's like, so as far as like, yeah, so there's that right there. Now, as far as the statistical records go, I've just kind of seen it as a thing that's more a product of today's era. Passing yards. I mean, rushing yards, I think rushing yards isn't as high in today's era because you got two set backs. A lot of teams use running backs in the passing game. They do a lot more passing plays. So, like, you don't really get the running back records as much. You still get some, like Saquon Barkley broke the all-time yards record in a season, which was held by Terrell Davis. So you might not get it as much now. Especially nowadays, like you said, two setbacks, running backs in the pass game, most rushing yards in a season. You have, like, it's Eric Dickerson, 84, Adrian Peterson, 2012, Jamal Lewis, 2003, Barry Sanders, 1997. Mostly a little bit older, so certain records get broken more frequently in sports as, like, three-point record changes a lot. More people enter it. Enter the top 10 as players shoot more threes. More quarterbacks enter the top 10 passing yards all time as teams are passing more frequently. Whereas, like, all-time rushing yards in a season, people don't crack the top 10 as often now. It might still happen from time to time, but you don't see it as much anymore. So stats, some people are going to say, oh, well, stats are pointless. This player only got top 10 because of their era they played in. And then try to use that as a negative stigma. Like, we know some old school football fans, but some of them will try to use that passing yards or TD stigma of, oh, they only got it because they were in this era. And there may be some truth to that, but as far as records as a whole goes, they don't tell the full story. Sometimes it's more, like, it can be more of a product of their era. Or it's like sometimes you look at most blocks in a single season in basketball, say, you're going to get more players from previous eras on that list. Guys like Dikembe Mutombo, probably Shaquille O'Neal and those guys. You might see Wemby reach one of those lists, but you're not going to see as many players in today's era reaching that list as you did in past eras. So I think, so there's that to consider. There's so many factors, like, when it comes to Pacific stats, that you gotta approach it with an open mind. If you want to look up, who has the top 10 most rushing yards in a single season? Who has the top 10 most interceptions in a single season? Who has the most receiving yards in a single season? You gotta take a look at the list and see, okay, majority of players come from a certain time frame. That could also be an indication that these records are a product of a certain era, or could be a signal of times changing. So it's not going to always tell you the full story as to who truly was the best. Like might pick a receiving yard. It's not going to truly tell you who automatically are the top 10 receivers of all time. You might even have some players appear multiple times on those records. So, I mean, so the point I'm getting is those stats alone don't tell the full picture. So, like when I see Kevin Durant move to top 5 all-time scoring, does that indicate he's one of the all-time greats? Yes. Does that indicate he's a top 10? I'm going to need a little more time to think about that, and there needs to be more context. Is Kevin Durant a top 15 NBA player all-time? Oh, absolutely. Say what you want to say about him, like him or not. Top 15, definitely. Top 10, I'll have to reevaluate a little bit. But just because he moved to top 5 all-time scoring doesn't necessarily make him an all-time top 5 player. You gotta look at how well he performed amongst the peers in his era. Like, are you really going to put Kevin Durant in his era over Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as one of the best of all time? No, as great as Durant is, when you look at the full context, no, because Kareem led multiple championship runs. He helped pave the way. He was a key factor, even as Magic Johnson was starting to take over the team. So he both led the way for the Bucks and then eventually the Lakers. And he showed that he could be more of a number 2 guy behind Magic when Magic kind of took over late in Kareem's career in the mid-'80s. So there's that as well. Kevin Durant showed that he really needed to be with the right team, with that being the Golden State Warriors, to have a true championship run. He's always been a great regular season player, but when he's not paired with the right guys come playoff time, he doesn't have that same success. So that would be a factor you could say leans more toward Kareem. Or then you say, like a Larry Bird versus Kevin Durant, that's an interesting discussion, actually. You're not just going to go based off who has the most points or this or that, because that doesn't tell the full story. Some people might lean toward Larry Bird having the edge because he was the lead guy for those Celtics teams in the 80s that got to numerous finals, and not to mention Larry Bird won 3 of his own, so anyone multiple regular season MVPs and finals MVPs, people are going to lean more toward Larry Bird as he was more dominant in his era than KD in his era. When it comes to forwards, love him or hate him, LeBron James is the most dominant forward of the KD's era. Love it or not. So there's that as well. You could argue maybe when Larry Bird started, Dr. J was the best small forward, but eventually, kind of like mid-'80s, Bird took over that spot. So there's that context to consider too. So the point is, you go to any debate at all, like who's the better player, LeBron or Kobe or Jordan, any of those debates, you got to come with the full context too. So stats are just, they're numbers. They may tell partial story, but they don't, and records for most, whatever of all time, tell a partial story. They do speak to greatness to some extent, but they don't tell the full story. Because you look at like the guys who were leads for all-time scoring, LeBron James, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, Kevin Durant, they're all in their own rights great players, but those rankings don't tell the full story of who was better or worse. Because like Michael Jordan, here's a factor for his all-time points. There was one season he was completely out of the league after the first three-peat. Then he was gone for 3 seasons after the Bulls' second three-peat before he came back for that 2-year stint with the Wizards. So from 1984 to 2003, there's 4 total seasons Michael Jordan didn't play a game. Not to mention there was one season early in his career where he broke his foot or something. I remember it was like early in his Bulls run, he missed most of the season too. So there was that season where he missed time due to injury, where he missed games. So that doesn't get factored in on like one of those all-time scoring lists. So yeah, like I said, it tells part of the story. It speaks to greatness to some degree, but it doesn't tell the full story. Like Bill Russell, most championship rings won. But you got to remember, there wasn't a lot of competition in that era too. So it does to a certain extent speak to Russell's greatness, but it doesn't compare and contrast the level of competition of Bill Russell went against to, say, a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or a Larry Bird, Wilt Chamberlain, Michael Jordan, and so on and so forth. So, records, numbers, like I said, don't tell the full story. I wouldn't say they're pointless, but they don't tell the full story. So, I mean, I could ramble on all night, but I'll stop it at that. So, guys, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoy this. Star Wars, Daniel Barry, everyone else who came by. Hope you have a great rest of your night or day, depending on where you're at. So, yeah, that being said, until next time, it's your boy Nicky Steve signing off. Peace. Catch y'all later.